As the planets move through the houses of the zodiac in your birth chart, one of the important places is always the 11th house from the house that the planet is a karaka for. So every planet's a karaka or a producer of certain house effects. So Saturn, for instance, creates the great responsibilities that you have to fulfill in your life, and as that, it creates those effects which are 10th house effects. So Saturn's the karaka of the 10th house. Saturn's also the karaka of longevity, which is the 8th house, and Saturn's the karaka of working on your health, which is the 6th house. So all the planets are different karakas or producers. Mars represents property, which is the 4th house. So as a planet moves through the 11th house from the house that it's the karaka or producer of, that period of that planet moving through that 11th house is a period of reward for how well you've done with the house in question. If you've managed the affairs of that house well, and you've been conscientious about it, when the planet moves through the 11th house, you're going to get a boost, and you're going to get some benefit and gain. And probably the most interesting one of these is Saturn's transit through the 8th house, or rather the 11th from the 10th. Saturn's really important in transit always. It's really the most important planet because it's the slowest moving planet. So it has really long-term effects whenever it goes through a house or a position in your chart. So whatever he kind of does while he goes through that house, you're going to be stuck with for a very long time. So, you want to sort of benefit from those transits. It's always a key time. Any Saturn transit is important. Now, when Saturn goes through the 11th from the 10th, and by the 10th, I mean you take the 10th house cusp, the 10th Bhava cusp, which is the midheaven cusp, and you calculate the 11th sign from that cusp. When Saturn goes through that, that's the period of reward for your karmas, your actions, the works that you've done, which are indications of the 10th house. If you've been conscientious and dutiful and responsible in the affairs that you've taken care of in your job and your work, then as Saturn moves through the 11th from the 10th, you get a benefit in your career. You get a career change, a career upliftment, a career you like more, work that's more meaningful, work that is more important. But you have some important change of total job or a big change in your job. And those changes are always going to be extremely long-term changes. If, on the other hand, you've been goofing off and not conscientious about fulfilling your worldly responsibilities in your work and your job, then when Saturn moves through that 11th house, you don't really have a lot of reward coming your way. And you might find yourself feeling really disappointed with what you've managed to accomplish in your life, in your career, and in your work. And at best, at that point, you may choose to work harder as the Saturn cycle continues. So the Saturn crossing the 8th, again, it's usually the 8th sign from the ascendant. Not always. If your 10th cusp falls in the 10th sign, then as Saturn transits the 8th sign from the ascendant, that's the critical place. But for people who are born in the far north or far south, quite commonly the 10th cusp may fall in the 9th sign or in the 11th sign. And you want to take the Saturn transiting in the 11th from the 10th cusp, not the 11th from the 10th sign. So keep that in mind. So, Saturn going through there is going to change a person's job for the long term. Oftentimes they get people coming into, and Saturn will be, say, going through the 10th from the 10th cusp, which is usually the 7th in the chart. And they'll be wanting to change their jobs. And I'll say, look, there's nothing long-term will happen until Saturn is going to go into the next sign, where it's going to be the 11th from your 10th. At that point, you'll be able to gain a more meaningful profession and career path. Okay, more meaningful work, more rewarding work, and so on. So, when Saturn did this to me, when I started doing Vedic astrology. Actually, it's when I found Vedic astrology and started practicing Vedic astrology. That was my final career change I've had. That was the last time Saturn did that. It only does it about every 29 years. So it's several years away before I'm due for it again about another 11 years. I'm due for it again. But that was the last time it happened, and since then I've been firm in this path of, doing work as an astrologer. Another person, when Saturn was going through the 11th through the 10th, became a programmer, and this was an Indian person. They got a programming, diploma, started programming, and within about a year of programming, again, while Saturn was moving through the 11th from the 10th, the person came to the U.S. and had a really nice, important position in a programming company, okay, which they remain up to this day about 15 years later or so. So long-term career changes, long-term rewards, and the reward of doing good work is getting a better opportunity at work. Okay, every planet has a different idea of a reward. Saturn, he wants to do things that are lasting, that are going to affect more people, that are going to have a bigger impact. So after he dies, his life will have meant something. Saturn wants his life to mean something because he's very aware of the fact that we're all mortal. Some of the other planets can forget that we're mortal, but Saturn's aware of that. So he wants to do something that's worth his time while he's down here on Earth. And if a person does their work conscientiously and dutifully and does a good job, when Saturn moves from the 11th from the 10th, they get the reward that's most dear to Saturn's heart, which is more meaningful work, because that's what Saturn does. He works. Saturn doesn't go on vacation. Saturn doesn't go enjoy something. That's not a reward to Saturn. To Saturn, that's like a curse. Venus and other planets, that's a nice reward for them. But Saturn, he wants the reward of more important and more meaningful and more beneficial and more helpful work. And if you've been doing a good job with your work, when Saturn goes to the 11th from your 10th, that's what you'll get. If you haven't really been focused in your career world or doing a good job in the world that you're in, when Saturn goes through that 11th from your 10th cusp, you're going to feel a real lack. And like, geez, I'm just wasting my time here. I'm not doing anything important. I'm not doing anything that's worth doing. And then that'll help you to find something else. So another example I had of a person, they just kind of been lackadaisically going through college and doing what all college kids do. Smoke pot, party, have a girlfriend, and get decent grades, which is totally easy to do in any American college, except for the really top tier ones. And then when Saturn, and they were getting a degree, and they were in their final year of getting their bachelor's degree, and but they just got it because they just had to get a bachelor degree. But then Saturn moved through the 11th from their 10th cusp, and they realized that they were kind of setting themselves up to do something that really wasn't going to matter, that really wasn't going to be helpful. They probably weren't even going to be able to get a really job that was really meaningful to them, or where they were really going to do important things with the degree that they were getting. So they decided at that point that they were going to become a healer instead and learn acupuncture and those types of things. So so they finished up their school. They needed to finish their bachelor's so they can get through acupuncture school really quick. So they determined that, all right, I'm going to finish up my bachelor's. I'm almost done at this university. Then I'm going to a acupuncture-specific university. And that's what I think will be meaningful, important work. And so they made that shift in their mind of what they were going to do that was going to be important and meaningful for them to do, worth their time, basically. And they began preparing and focusing on that. Okay, now they didn't actually graduate from acupuncture school and start working as an acupuncturist and a Oriental doctor until a few years later, when Saturn was crossing their 10th cusp. And of course, as I've talked about in other videos, Saturn crossing the 10th cusp was always a period of development in the context of the work you're doing. So Saturn in the 8th is always going to change your work in the context of trying to give you a reward for your work done. And if you really haven't been focused, it can change your focus like it did in this last person. But if you have been focused, you just get a higher level of responsibility and importance and greater duties, and you are basically doing greater deeds. Because again, Saturn in respect to the 10th house are the great things we do. And so which makes our time really, really worthwhile. And so the reward for Saturn as it crosses that 11th from the 10th is the reward of doing things that make your time more worthwhile, more important, or finding something that will alert you to the need that you don't have that, and that you need that. You need that reward. All the planets have a reward need, and they come to terms with that reward need by either having it or by realizing they need it when they move through the 11th house from the house that they're the karaka for. So in the context of the 10th house, Saturn's reward need is meaningful work. Work that's worth the time it takes to do. Okay? And if you have that, you get it to a greater dose when Saturn moves through the 11th from your 10th. If you don't have it, you realize the need of it and you start searching for it, as this last example did. Okay? So I really consider that Saturn through that 11th from the 10th cusp one of the most important transits you're ever going to have. People always say, oh, I'm in Sadhisati, it's so important. Well, Sadhisati has an effect, but it's not important in the context of your whole life, the way this Saturn transing the 8th house cusp is, or I'm sorry, Saturn transing the 11th from the 10th cusp is. This is a life-changing transit. It's one of the most important transits you're going to have. Okay? Extremely important period for coming to terms with, has my life and all the work I've done been worth it? Or have I been wasting my time? It's a huge thing. So sometimes you will find people going through a lot of depression when Saturn goes to that position if they've realized that they've been squandering their time. But if a person's been using their time wisely and productively to do great things, then they get the reward of greater responsibilities and greater things, and they become a great person who people remember long after their death.